It's very emotional for me because I'm meeting new family members, people I have not met in my entire life, and they are formally introducing themselves, and they're coming from different parts of the nation. And I just want to tell all you all welcome, and thank you for being here to participate in this event. My name is Dr. LaTanya Bowman, and I'll be your MC for today's presentation. I would like to thank everyone for coming this afternoon to our presentation here at High Point Museum. Today's presentation that will be presented is titled The History of the Jamestown, North Carolina Freedom Pioneers, the Weaver Settlement. There will be two segments of this presentation. The first segment will be from 12 to 1 p.m. from Dr. Kirsten Priest, and the second segment will be from 1 to 2 p.m., which will be the open forum and community discussion, and light reception will follow. High Point Museum has designated a photographer, and the museum will be videoing today's event. So we ask everyone to please be aware of the filming and recording that will be done throughout the presentation. During the first portion of this presentation, our presenter, Dr. Kirsten Priest, would like us to all take note that this presentation has been copyrighted by the Pettiford Weaver family of Indiana and the Museum of Marion, Indiana. So the information that we presented today and shown here cannot be used nor copyrighted without the permission of Dr. Kirsten Priest and or the family. For today's presentation on March 15th, 2025, here at the High Point Museum, we will be discussing the African American and the Free People of Color Abolitionist movement in Jamestown, North Carolina, and Grant County, Indiana. Within these two areas of township is where you will find these families who banded together to assist a strategic plan with the Quakers to help end and abolish slavery. Today, you will learn who these people are, where did they come from, and who are these core families. This is my family's story and their history. The Free Black Pioneer Farm Settlement, which was established by free people of color, the core group which traveled in strategic planned caravans from the small town of Jamestown located here in Guilford County, North Carolina. They settled in Grant County, Indiana around 1840 to 1860, and by the time the Civil War began, they had accumulated as a community over 600 acres of land. Some of those folks fought in the Civil War. Their little community was assigned to its own post office and became known as Weaver, Indiana. As we are still learning much of the Underground Railroad story, most of the story is known through the history of the Quakers, who were very important partners for pre-Civil War people of color. However, there is a lesser-known story, one of the most strategic parts that was extremely important. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself these questions? We know the story of the Underground Railroad, but once the runaway slaves reach their destination, where are they supposed to live and what are they supposed to do? This is where my family came into play. Beach Settlement, Indiana, Longtown Settlement, Indiana, Weaver Settlement, Indiana, Lost Creek Settlement, Indiana, Robert Settlement, Indiana, and many more. The African American Church, the Free People of Color families, and the African American families were also the backbone of resistance to slavery and played a critical point in the Underground Railroad movement. The African Methodist Episcopal Church in particular had a key missionary circuit rider, Reverend William Paul Quinn, who became the fourth bishop that established over 100 free black settlements in the North prior to the Civil War. It was a strategic plan, and it was a strategic plan to resist slavery. The Free People of Color and African American families from Jamestown, North Carolina, were part of this abolitionist movement. Today's presenter, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Kirsten Priest. Dr. Priest earned her master's in anthropology from the University of South Carolina and her PhD in sociology in Loyola University, Chicago. Her prize-winning research has been on race relations and how religion has an impact. From a case study on an interior racial church murder in South Carolina, 1995 to 1996, to a curated museum exhibit of how free people of color resisted slavery before the Civil War. Dr. Priest follows the clues that help reveal hidden histories. She is currently a retired professor and lives in Louisville with her husband, retired anthropologist, close by her kids and grandkids. What will be presented to you today has been 50 plus years of research that has been accumulated by the descendants of these families in Indiana and North Carolina since the 1970s. At the end of our presentation, we will take a quick 5-minute break and we'll begin the second segment of the event with the open forum and community discussion. If you'd like to contact Dr. Priest for more information on her presentation, you can email her at kabaytpriest@aol.com. Let's give Dr. Priest a hand and I will have her to take the floor.
I will be juggling a few things here, I think. I just want to tell you, it is an incredible privilege to be here. And I want to thank the family members that have hosted us so beautifully. Ms. Ruby here, and also Dr. LaTanya. And I just want to thank the High Point Museum folks, Sarah and all of your crew. They have been phenomenal. And I want to thank the community for coming out and the family members that are here, my fellow panel members that are going to be here, and of course, the folks that are part of the government of the area here. I won't go through all those people for the sake of time, but I would like to first ask, because I just met one of your family members, any of the family members that are here, would you mind standing? Because I would like everyone to see who you are and give them a hand. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm gonna try to pull it together. This is really, really exciting. Before I go into a whole lot more detail, I would like to just give a bit of background on some of the kin and and more broadly, the free people of color that were in existence in 1830. So a bit of a framework, right? So there were about, and across the country, so by 1830, there were about 142,000 free people of color that lived in the Northeast, just the Northeast alone. And and at that time, there were about 122,000 that also lived in the Upper South, which would have been Delaware, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And then also, about 58,000 lived in the South that you all are familiar with here. And over 1,400 plus were in the territories or the frontier that we're going to be talking about now. But now this was early, this is 1830 as they're opening up the frontier. Who were the free people of color? I would like to go into that a bit more, but I'm going to really defer to my fellow panelist who is going to follow me for a better discussion of that. He's a fellow anthropologist, Mr. Forrest Hazel. Dr. Lisa Ann Cox, who is at Harvard University, has done the most recent research that I'm aware of on this particular phenomenon of free people of color and what they were doing with land in particular. And I tried to give you an image here to help you to understand where free people of color were coming from and then going to as they were doing this project of selling land in the places where they had lived in the South, and then moving north as pioneers into areas where they could recreate their farm pioneer lives. By 1860, Dr. Cox notes that there were 338 documented settlements, okay, so even far more than what you're seeing right here, but there's a reason why you're seeing that map right now. In her calculations, what she can see is that 1 in 5 free people of color by 1860 owned land. She also calculates that in many of these communities, there were individual farmers that owned up to 1,000 acres and or in excess of $10,000 in personal wealth before the Civil War. Nevertheless, the social experience of free people of color was always intertwined with those who were enslaved because of the economic system in America that coded persons into categories of privilege or lack of privilege by color. A whole discussion could be had about race in America, and I've published on some of that, and some of the early researchers, Du Bois and Boas, who worked on that. But we don't have time for that. But we're going to focus on how the free people of color who we would understand in the American system tend to be coded as Black or Negro or colored, and we're going to try to figure out how they resisted the constraints of the slave system as never enslaved, many of them never enslaved people, to preserve themselves, their children, their possessions, and also provide for and protect those who were escaping the slave system. At the root of it, and there's many of you who have done research on this, and you'll get excited. At the root of it is family and a deep faith. It was at the heart of this project that free people of color pursued in their effort to fully thrive. And to that end, they also looked for partners of faith that also believed in and supported freedom, which leads us to the anti-slavery project and understanding that. I just want to point out what you're seeing right here is Grant County, okay? And you are seeing some of those partners here already in this map. These folks that are in the green boxes are the Quaker Friends, and you know who those people are down here. You also had Wesleyans, AME, Presbyterians, and Baptists as well, which is some of what I'm doing more recently, that research. But I wanted to just put up there for you who these people were of faith that were in the project of accomplishing what we're going to talk about. Here you see Levi Coffin as an older man. He was a young man when he was here, and then he moved north. And you also are seeing Bishop William Paul Quinn, and this man was a very impressive 6'4" person of color, and he became one of the bishops of the AME Church and was instrumental in founding all those little communities across the Northwest. He was a circuit rider, but we're not going to get into that quite yet. I'm just giving you a foretaste of that. Here you can see the folks that are the free people of color, one family. And the reason I have their picture here is because this is a family of Martha, right here, and her husband, Joseph Pettiford. And they were the ones who started the family reunions that were carried on and are still carried on today. That those of you who have even come from Atlanta and all that, you go on up to Weaver for those reunions. This is the little country church up there, Hills Chapel AME. And I put this in here just to remind us that these were the free people of color that were working against this kind of a system that was the slave institution in the United States. So this anti-slavery project, it started as early as 1775 in Pennsylvania, and it was really very committed people of faith, Quakers, that established the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, and I will not go into all the details, so please forgive me because we have so much. 1833, you have the American Anti-Slavery Society with the Tappins. 1835, you have Garrison's Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, and then the black leadership joined with the Garrisons and the organization then which became the New England Anti-Slavery Society based in Boston, where 1 in 4 people were free people of color. The vast wealth of James Fortin, a free person of color who was a businessman, supported these efforts. Black and white speakers and writers of published materials were key to the success as they were spreading their message of freedom and anti-slavery. So together, free people of color had friends of faith, Quakers, Presbyterians, Baptists, Methodists, others, Wesleyans. It was ever more apparent, though, to them that you couldn't just depend on faith and persuading people by appealing to conscience. You might have to go up against the big system of slavery in legal ways. And this is also a discussion that could be much longer, but we're going to jump now into legal and not legal ways. But I'm going to now go to the actual research of what we did in Weaver, Indiana, so that you can see where we were moving. So this is myself and a younger self when we first started this research. And I always want to acknowledge the students who were the fellow researchers with us, because this could not have been possible without the very hard work of students. And here you have them, Sophia, Micah, Amanda, and in successive years we had different ones of them. And Lily, Miss Lily right here, was one of our experts. She was the treasurer of the NAACP, of which I was a member, and she ran a luncheon kitchen for the older folks in town. We would go, we would volunteer, and it was part of how we were being part of our community to learn more about what the story was of Weaver. And here's my partner in crime, the anthropologist, Bob Priest. He was huge in helping this project because he's really good with writing grants. To be honest, you need money when you do this sort of thing because it becomes an extensive thing and it requires resources. We went to the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Ohio. It was a way to start to really get more acquainted with some of the documents and research that's out there. We also interviewed the many people in our community who were experts, local experts on the history of Weaver. You see here Mr. Marcus Cannon, Mr. Vaughn Jackson up here. These are key leaders in the community. This whole family, if anyone's familiar with the Clemens family, they are a very important family. They were a very wealthy family, actually, in Ohio. Some of them were in Weaver. And we also could not miss talking with Mr. Otis Dodson, Grand Master of the Prince Hall Masons, and he was the one that was able to give us a lot of information about a very hidden history of these Black leadership organizations which worked for the Underground Railroad. There were so many people I could name off. I'm not going to name them all. As a group, one of the important things we wanted to do was to also understand who had done prior research that we could build out on. Dr. Cheryl LaRoche has written The Free Black Communities and the Underground Railroad. Her research was critical for what we did. She's an archaeologist. She has worked often on these kinds of projects, identifying settlements, and her book became the way that we could understand more of our own story. Here you see her meeting Caleb Evans. He's another one of the Weaver descendants right here. You all who are from the family know who he is, and Dr. LaRoche was signing his book for him. She stresses that the Underground Railroad included way stations, destination points that stretched across the new territory that was opening up and extended into Canada. And some of you all have been tracing that in your own family histories. So Dr. LaRoche, she is the one that has come up with this map, and she has identified 100 pre-Civil War free black settlements, including Weaver in Grant County. And she outlines the ways in which they established these settlements and how they worked in conjunction with the Underground Railroad. She suggests the traits that you want to follow to be able to identify if indeed you have one of these settlements, and to understand how important these settlements were in the way Black abolitionists were operating is to recognize that the Black leadership conferences were getting up and running at about 1830, and then you had a Black leadership conference that took place in 1847, and it was designed to address some of the pressing needs that the Black abolitionists felt was key. And I want to read number 11 from that conference, because it's, I think, kind of astounding to understand what was happening. Resolved that this convention recommend to our people the propriety of instructing their sons in the art of war. This was in 1847 that this was actually discussed. Not only that, but they had one of their Black conferences in 1842, a little bit earlier, and it was resolved at that time that they were going to work on issues of immigration and, the immigration, in 1830, they were working on the, I have several of these and I'm going to get them mixed up. But anyway, there were several of them going on, and what they were beginning to do was to get their white partners from the Quakers to join in some of these conventions. The 1830 Constitution Convention was founded, and in that one, they were just determining how they could purchase lands and establish settlements in Upper Canada. So these were things that they were trying to work on as they were getting together. And of course, you had the resources of people out on the East Coast to support what they were trying to do. Now, Bishop William Paul Quinn is also a very important minister. So what he is trying to do is not just think about how to help people to move and purchase land in some of these areas. He's also thinking of planting AME churches, African Methodist Episcopal churches in each one of those places as a core part of how a network of resistance can be formed. Now, to understand Bishop William Paul Quinn and that project, he was the vice president for when they had the National Immigration Convention in 1854. At that convention, it was decided that rather than creating landed associations for free people of color, each individual should secure a sufficient homestead of 100 acres or more or less to suit the individual. And I want you to understand now, these are people who had resources. That's how they could strategize in this sort of way. And as we know here in Jamestown, in this area, there were folks that had their own land. And we have people working on that project to identify that, and it was being sold. They were taking their resources and they were caravanning north to settle these places that were being pioneered by Bishop William Paul Quinn and also their friends, the Quakers. Levi Coffin and Bishop Quinn, two people, two friends, and they collaborated together in Indiana, in the area of what is now, Fountain City, but it was where the Quakers established an important anchor and foothold in this strategy of resistance. And also Bishop William Paul Quinn had a 17-acre horse ranch. We're talking wealth, we're talking investment in ways to promote freedom. And when Bishop William Paul Quinn, 6'4" gentleman, riding half-wild horses, would ride up, people listened. They listened, and he was an incredibly charismatic preacher. The AME church that was founded in Weaver was under his episcopate, and the Quakers also were coming along on that project. So when he said, let's get these settlements full of farmers that are coming with the vision of creating new pioneer settlements, you had Quakers coming along on that project. Aaron Betts, an important Quaker in our records, and we just discovered in the Guilford archives his links. He came along up to Grant County, and when he was in Grant County, he purchased large amounts of land, and he was the land broker for the folks who were, I'm looking at Gwen back there because she runs the archive over there, and we just discovered it yesterday. And he was working with these three people of color to be able to get their land all arranged. And that is in the history of that settlement. Okay. Let's just think about Indiana now as a place to go. This was a grand vision to go and emigrate and establish these wonderful settlements. But what were people of color up against? Indiana, even though the Northwest Territory was supposed to be free of slavery, it had to be actually determined, legally redetermined, that there was going to be no slavery in 1820. In 1830, how easy was it for people to migrate up there? Not easy. African American settlers are required to register and post a $500 bond. Not only do you have to have all your resources to have your land, you have to do what other people don't have to do, have extra money. 1843, the law bans Negroes and mulatto people from marrying whites, and there were white people in the Weaver settlement. They had intermarried with people, and we're going to wait for our panelists to talk more about that. And they couldn't testify against people in court. Their rights are being reduced as they are increasing in number in Indiana. And in 1851, the state constitution bans any Negro or mulatto from settling in Indiana and specifies up to $500 fines for any white person lending support. Now you begin to understand just how strong these people's faith was in the fact that anti-slavery needs to be the project. And we are going to work against it, and we may be going outside the bounds of the law, which is exactly what started to happen. And the way you can see this is that in spite of these laws, look at the demographics of what was happening. 1840, you start to have your first folks coming in, Weavers and Pettifords, okay? We don't know exact numbers, but it was a small number. But by 1850, you got 144. I mean, now we're talking about the laws kicking in big time. You've got 381. By 1870, now this is after the Civil War, you've got up to 736, and it's a thriving settlement, thriving. And to explain what we're talking about by thriving is what Dr. Annalisa Cox talks about when she tracks the 338 black settlements in the Northwest Territory. She tracks their wealth, and she tracks just how much wealth there was, and it was a lot. In Grant County alone, I brought the map. It's like this wonderful square thing, right? And it's actually, even today, it's considered the richest farmland in the state of Indiana. And in this area, you had 4 settlements, not just Weaver. You had 4. And actually, the number of acreage that they had was not just 600, it was far greater than that. It was up into the thousands of acres, you know? So they were starting small, but it was growing. Okay, here we go. So when Dr. LaRoche says, track this stuff, at this point, a lot of these places might be covered by cornfields. They might not be there anymore. In some places, they're covered with pavement. These little places where settlement took place. In Grant County, they actually still have some clues. And when Dr. LaRoche talked to us, she said, you look for those clues and track them, because it's going to give you the proof that you indeed had one of these kind of settlements. And we are incredibly grateful, because number one, you need to be able to follow to see if indeed you have some sort of family that has kept track of this. And we have, we have this beautiful book, which is downstairs, that was put together by this Norma Scott Johnson and her co-writers and researchers. The family has had reunions forever. I mean, it's 100+ years, and even before that, but you know, an official reunion. And in this, you have these family trees. And not only this, but you also begin to try, and this is what we did, we tried to get maps where you could actually follow to see if there was land that could be identified with these families, with these people that are named. And indeed, what you can see, and actually I cut this off right here, but this is Aaron Betts, and this was the little bit of land that he still had before it was transferred to other folks that were coming in. You've got the Burden family here, you've got the Wallace family here, you've got the Pettifords over here. You've got a Coffin over here, I think some of you know that name, and then you've got the Weavers over here, the Smiths over here, and it could go on. So we were triangulating to get a hold of, do we have a place here? And do we have it? Yes, we do. So here's one of the things that we found over time as we pieced it together. Here you go. In 1850, in the dark maroon, you can see the land plats that were owned here by people that had arrived. These are original, okay? And then by 1860, at the start of the Civil War, you've got the rest of them in there. And the folks from here are the folks that went up there to do that. Just let that sink in for a minute. That's pretty cool. So by 1860, our research discovered that black settlers owned a documented 3,600 acres, most in Liberty Township, but also spread in some of those other parts of the county. So definitely, this place meets up with the standard of what Dr. LaRoche says of identifying an anti-slavery abolitionist settlement. Second, Dr. LaRoche says you want to focus on black agency for freedom and how they were accomplishing that. In Grant County, if you were to go there, what you would see is actually, you would see a place where there was a family, and there's a little marker there that says Weaver was here. But it's not just that. We have artifacts. We have a significant amount of artifacts. And part of the sadness to me was we couldn't bring any, but they're so precious. It's very hard to bring them without destroying them. But in Grant County, one of the elders, Dolores Beck Betts, the grandmother of one of our guests here, she saved the artifacts and she gifted many of them to the museum. They had been tucked away in the basement, but when we started doing this research and I told them how important it was, they started to be willing to bring it out. And on one day, we went, and with the students, we did the archaeology. You just take all those pieces and you put them out where you measure them, and we actually did 3D images of them. And it was a bit of a sacred experience because you're basically taking items that were in the hands of people who decided that they would be part of this anti-slavery project. This hammer right here, I'm just going to point out really quickly, that was the family Beck's artifact. And Matthew Beck's master, there's the story of this that is in the history of the county, allowed him to leave the plantation for a year. His master was a Quaker. He officially freed him, but then he said to him, Matthew, you can go for a year and you can earn the $1,000 that it's going to take to buy your wife and 2 sons out of slavery on another plantation. And he was a blacksmith. And he went and he did that. He got that money. And it just makes me a little bit choked up to realize that this hammer could have been part of that. Clearly, former slaves sometimes arrived in Weaver, not simply because of white abolitionist help, but many white abolitionists were key to it. All those Quaker settlements that were around, they were key to also providing cover and safety. Third item, Dr. LaRoche points out that community strategies of resistance really relied on the desire for self-emancipation. And this is key to how this worked with Weaver and what they were providing to people who were leaving slavery. In the record, historic record, there is this story about John F. Weaver, who was an escaped slave, and his name was Bolden when he arrived at this settlement. But finding so many Weavers in the settlement, he adopted that name as a protection from slave hunters. That's amazing, isn't it? They were playing a very unique role there, and this is the historic lithograph that was made back in about the 1890s of the Weaver farm. That's the only one that we have actually to see what it might have looked like. Fourth clue to figure out if this is one of those abolitionist centers where people are supporting the anti-slavery project. You look for evidence of an AME church because we know that Bishop Quinn was going across and founding these. And sure enough, wouldn't you know, Bishop William Paul Quinn founded this little church. Actually, he was the, and I'm not an AME, so he was the Episcopate leader at the time, but he commissioned in Louisville at Quinn Chapel, which in Louisville, mind you, you had a lot of free people of color, and it was a very important church in Louisville and right on the other side of the Ohio River. And what he did was he commissioned several men to be in charge of going and following up in these settlements. Hill's Chapel is named after Benjamin Hill, who was one of those ministers that was sent by William Paul Quinn to go up there. Not only that, he also sent up Ben Skipworth, and he is in our land records. Fifth clue that you look for with a settlement like this. According to LaRoche, Civil War gravestones are very important for identifying if there was a free black settlement. And indeed, this is it. When you go to that little spot that has a little sign that says Weaver was here, you go a little bit further and there is a historic black graveyard. And in that graveyard, you see those Civil War veterans right here. George Peterson, Thomas Guilford, still with their gravestones visible. And here you see in, overhead what that actually looks like. And one of the things that's been challenging is that the farmland around there, because it's so rich, it's been encroaching, the farmers have been encroaching on that graveyard, because we know there's like over 400 people there, and it's gotten smaller. So these are issues that families have to deal with. Sixth clue, do we have an abolitionist black settlement? You want to see if in that settlement there were any connections in the area to other abolitionist projects and movements and leadership. And actually, in fact, there are. In this community, they have record that Frederick Douglass, who was very famous, of course, we know that name, right, from out east and the anti-slavery movement. He came and he had actually gone down to Pendleton to speak, and that's where he had actually been beaten up, and he had his fellow abolitionists actually try to keep him safe as he was being, attacked. Indiana had people who were called copperheads, and they were people who were most glad to work once you had the Fugitive Slave Act and you could get money for people. They were trying to move people back south again. But Frederick Douglass was there in Pendleton, and then after that he went up to the area where Weaver is, and he spoke up there, and many hundred people gathered there. And we have evidence of that from an original letter that speaks to the fact that he had been up there at the grounds that were the Presbyterian Church right on the side of the river there. They had to have an outdoor meeting because of how many people were there. Of course, we know Levi and Catherine Coffin, they were very important leaders. And you can see family members' names in these different places, and that's part of how we located it. But we know that Bishop William Paul Quinn was up in that area because not only was he part of establishing the AME Church, but he was a Prince Hall Mason. And so he was in charge of also expanding that as a black leadership organization that people in the community could be part of. That gets us to number 7. Dr. LaRoche says, you want to look and see if in the communities there is any evidence that there had been Prince Hall Masons or other kinds of black leadership organizations, because they will let you know that there was cross-cutting connection nationally to work against slavery, because those were the folks that were part of the black leadership conventions that started to take place. And indeed, we do have the Prince Hall Masons. And in Grant County, the Prince Hall Masons were founded in 1858. They were there very early. And the names that we have there correspond to the land patent plats. It all fits together. And here's again an aerial, and here's Hills Chapel right here. And you can also see right here, they established a home for the elderly in 1820. And if you think about it, by that time, you might have had folks that had even fought in the Civil War that needed a place to be. That would have been a bit late, but they actually were able to accomplish it. Here's the gate to Weaver's Prince Hall. And where do the family reunions take place? Does this look familiar, you all? Mm-hmm. Exactly. This is where the family reunions take place. As LaRoche points out, 3 Black communities that functioned as underground railroad destinations were nearly always close to earlier abolitionist centers. And in this case, Weaver was established right near the abolitionist town of Jonesboro, and that was also the place where Frederick Douglass visited. And so our researchers went to some of the historic houses that were used in the Underground Railroad. And this house right here, Israel Jenkins' house, is on the east side of the Mississippi River, right here. This is the big river going through. In fact, some of you all that know Quakers, Lydia Baldwin's family that settled, they were some of the famous Quakers. She has in her diary telling about how her family, when they came in on boats to settle in Gregg County. So that was the river. I mean, it was the road. The river was the road because it was such dense forest before it was cleared that people couldn't get through there. And so this is where these abolitionists established their churches, because if anybody was moving out of slavery, they'd often use the river. You know the famous song, right? Wade in the water. It's because it was so critical as a way for people to potentially get out and move north. So you can see here, First Presbyterian Church, we went into their archives. It's abolitionists that are in their archives. Jonesboro Friends Church, abolitionists in their archives, in their church notes. The Wesleyans, off the map, but they're right down over here. And where is Weaver? If a person came right here, they could go over to the Israel Jenkins house going east. They could also get out here, go to the Jonesboro Friends Church. Here's the First Presbyterian Church, and then they just go west, due west. There's one more Quaker church, and just within a few miles, you're in Weaver. Was there a strategy? Yes, there was. Absolutely. According to LaRoche, the waterways are critical to being able to figure it out, that this indeed is the pattern, and it was a strategic pattern of resistance. We would often take students in the community to go on river canoe trips to help them to understand just exactly what that is and how that worked. You can see, where did the Quakers build their little meetings? Walnut Creek, Mississippi Church. They're not churches, they're meetings, I'm sorry. Back Creek, Deer Creek. And up in here, you had others that aren't even located. Well, you can see them by the stars, the different ones. Then you can see, the circles, and then the stars are the Wesleyans. I could go into the history of the Quakers here, but I am going to keep on going. The Wesleyans were the more radicals. We know this, but we'll talk a little bit about the Quakers first. Aaron Betts, of course, was a white Quaker that helped to secure the first land titles for those in Weaver. And these are the original documents from the Quaker records of what they did as they were involved in this. In the Grant County Society of Friends, in their Committee of African Concerns, they would meet at Back Creek, and they raised resources for the black settlements, and they would just list out what they were gathering and how they were distributing it. Food, clothing, quilts, schools, teacher salary, freedmen's education, all of this. And in the record it says sometimes the Quaker ladies would go out and they would visit the school in Weaver, and they would check and see, oh, tell us which of the children need a little extra, because we want to be sure that if they're just newly arrived, they've got shoes and they've got good clothes. They were so thoughtful, and some of the free people of color can even remember that their families named them after some of those Quakers because of how precious that relationship was. And this is, of course, Lydia Baldwin's diary. We have the pleasure of keeping the runaway slaves and sending them to Canada. 15 slaves arrived here at Deer Creek one night, and then 14 more. It is estimated that about 1,500 people that were self-emancipating and leaving slavery passed through Grant County. Not one was recovered to be sent south. And it's because there was a system of guarding people, keeping them safe. The Wesleyans, somebody said, they were a little rougher. Yes, they were. Yes, they were. The Wesleyans, as abolitionists, they split from the Methodists in 1842. Slavery was a big part of the reason why they split. And a lot of these denominations split over slavery. The Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Methodists. These Wesleyans here in Grant County, they were wild. Some, like the Joseph Moses and William Bradford, that family, they were known for shooting out with people, like if there was a problem. And there were several of these folks that were known for their house being a place where people were staying right on the road through Grant County and Marion in particular. Because of the river, it was such an excellent way. See, the Mississippi flows north, which is a wonderful way to get to where you're going. But then you've got to get over to Fort Wayne, you've got to, so you've got to have horses and all of that, and that's what these folks were doing. They had horses and they were providing a way. And you had interracial Wesleyan Church in Weaver, which is unique. That's unique. Because not all fellow abolitionists felt comfortable worshiping together, and that's a whole other story, right? But Beverly Pettiford was a big supporter of the Wesleyan Church. Several of the Pettifords, and Edmund Pettiford, when he passed away and his obituary was put in the paper, and he's from Jamestown, it said that he was a member of the Wesleyan Church when he passed. That was, I believe, 1899. How did we figure out all those abolitionist folks? Well, let me tell you, it was a job. But we had church records of the people that we knew were the anti-slavery churches. We also had what is gold from a researcher standpoint, which is we had one of the Weaver family that went from here to Weaver write his own autobiography. And because of that autobiography, which was published, and we used to have an original copy in Marion in the museum, and then family took it. But that's the way it goes sometimes. We were able to locate, these were the people that Thomas P. Weaver said were my friends in Grant County. That is an incredible list for someone to write at the end of their life. They had made an impact on him. And he himself worked in the Underground Railroad movement with another gentleman and writes about that. This is a story of abolitionists that people don't always hear, right? And it's pretty special. Asnath Peters, who was the first woman of color to graduate from the Marion High School, had a Quaker woman mentor her, and she gives great thanks at the beginning of her history of the Negro people in Grant County. And it's downstairs in the Centennial book, you can see it. And she says that the reality was that in Weaver and in that county, people from all around got together for revivals, for harvesting together, for the camp meetings, for the horse races. There were a lot of supportive relationships that were in place. Not that every neighbor was supportive, but there were a lot. This is actually the place on the map, right where Frederick Douglass spoke, right on the east side of the Mississippi River. Here you have the actual minutes, and those of you that know the Quaker records are going to be very familiar with some of these names. These are the minutes on African concerns from 1855 to 1868. Overman, Sugar, Hill, Knight, Baldwin, Macy, Lundy, Winslow, Hyatt. We could go on. These are the people. I can see some of you grinning. This history is absolutely present in Grant County, and it is present here in Jamestown because we are connecting it. We are connecting it. And just to give you another visual, there were many supportive white neighbors, and the way we could locate it was because of Thomas Weaver's writing and the church minutes. You see their land in blue, and then you can see here, this is Weaver right here. And all of their acreage in relation to the river, in relation to the different churches. This is how you can thrive when you decide you're going to go against US law. I mean, just being honest here. These people were working together. Thousands of African Americans in Grant County have ties with these early Weaver Pettiford relatives and settlers. And there has been heartache in Grant County. There was a lynching that took place in the 1930s, probably the most famous lynching photo that you will see in the history books. Abe, yeah, and Tommy. Abe Smith, Tommy Ship. And the family told me, please do not tell this story without also recognizing them. Because by 1830, you could see that there was a lot of wealth in this community. And yes, violence was a way to let this community know that they needed to stay in their place. And it is a truth that's a hard truth. And when we did the museum exhibit in Grant County, it was actually the teenagers that told us, please, please, on the timeline of the museum, don't forget them. Now, I wouldn't use their picture. I can't do that. But we created a memorial marker on the timeline to commemorate them. And Abe Smith's family is kin to all you down here. What is the ongoing legacy? What is the ongoing legacy? It's profound. You all have ongoing legacy here in this part of the country. There's ongoing legacy up in that part of the country in Indiana. And I'm going to just very quickly, tell me the time because I do not. Thank you, thank you. I think in 5 minutes we can do this. I wouldn't want to end this without noting that people that are kin to you all, family that are here, that were part of this project of anti-slavery, they went on and had tremendous contributions to make, and I am going to just very quickly speak to one of those individuals now. And there's a reason. I taught in a Wesleyan university in Grant County, and I went to Jackson Library on a regular basis. And I saw a gentleman's face outside the library as a commemoration. And I realized there's a legacy here. And this legacy of the Weaver abolitionists, it crosses law, education, and efforts at reconciliation in the community. But I'm just going to quickly go through it. We are familiar now with the fact that there's a heritage here that is absolutely supported by research, by data. We know the history, though, that even with the strides that were made forward, there was still law that kept people back. Segregation laws kicked into effect. Plessy versus Ferguson. Berea College versus the state of Kentucky. Integrated college that had grown out of the anti-slavery movement in Kentucky. And that's where the US court said, no, people can't be together in college classrooms. They have to be 20 miles apart or something like that.
And then in Marion, there is going to be a segregation case that takes place. And the segregation case is actually descendants of folks from the Pettifords and Weavers. It is two sisters, the Burton sisters, and they were told they couldn't come into the establishment. And their case was taken forward in court, and that court ruled in their favor. Lawyers took it back, and a couple years later, they ruled against them. So in Grant County, there is growing segregation. John Will Burton, one of the Pettiford relatives, he became a school teacher. Could he teach in any school? No. He had to teach in the black segregated schools. Weaver had those schools, and he was one of those prominent teachers, became a lawyer, became the Grand Master of the Prince Hall Masons in Indiana as well, and established that home for the elderly. He was an amazing, amazing individual. That is the legacy of some of your family. Here's another one of the schools, D.E. Payne. And what did people do? They didn't just lay down. They got up and they got going. They formed the NAACP. Half of the members of the NAACP were folks that had heritage from Weaver. Here's Marion College. Marion College has a history of having been a Quaker school, also a public school, and then it merged and the Wesleyans purchased it. By 1920 now, the Wesleyans were in charge of it. And who were some of the students that came there? From the very beginning, it was an integrated school. And in this integration, there were people that you're going to recognize. They were those folks that were Weaver descendants. You've got Dolores Jones. Got William Weaver over there. You've got William Wilson, Carlisle Guilford, Floyd Jeffries. These people went on and they had an impact. But this gentleman right here had a very special impact. He came to the school from Angola, further north. Now he had kin down in Weaver. He was a brilliant, brilliant person. He actually learned how to fly airplanes before he even came to college. His milkman helped him to learn, and a few other people. I mean, it was a very wild time back then with airplanes. But he had actually designed his own airplane. And he would fly that little thing down to go to college. He'd park on the Tom Davis land. I don't know, do you park plane? But that was a former one of the Quaker families, and that's where he would actually park his plane, just down the road from the college. Now, this college it's integrated, but I want you to see what was in the yearbook. Now that's an insult to your students of color. And that was at the time when this brilliant person, Mr. Jackson, is matriculating in the school. So Marion College, right down the street from one of the historic A&B churches right here, Bethel. And Mr. Jackson, Lewis Jackson, that's his church. And he's going there while he's going to college. He graduates from college, and he's also getting to know somebody. Who's he getting to know? He's getting to know Violet Burton, one of the Pettiford relatives. They end up getting married, and they have children. He wants to teach. He's got a teaching degree. He cannot teach in the regular public schools, but he ends up figuring out, he advances his aeronautics up in Chicago, and then he goes to Tuskegee, and he teaches there, Historic College. And while he's there, Pearl Harbor happens. When Pearl Harbor happens, we realize we can't win this war without airplanes. And who knows airplanes? People like Lewis Jackson. And so indeed, who becomes the person that these ladies go to make a way so that we can now have an integrated Air Force? They go down to Tuskegee, and here's Lewis Jackson. He is director of ground training and flight training. And who are they giving a ride to? Eleanor Roosevelt. That's the kind of people who made a way. The Tuskegee Airmen that he trained, they desegregated the military. This is the list of their accomplishments. I'm over time, and I'm not going to read it all. But it's phenomenal. Phenomenal. Get that picture? I know you want that picture. Okay. This is my last slide. Second to last. I want us to understand a little bit of the heritage of what the folks were doing that were free people of color, that were putting family, friends, faith out in front to accomplish a land project, to collect resources for the future, make a way. This is what they were doing. Lewis Jackson became an educator. He got a PhD at the Ohio State University. He was an inventor. He invested in a little company called Walmart, and he became very rich, very rich. He became the president of Center up in Ohio, and he eventually donated the money to the Wesleyan school that I taught at for the library. That's awesome to me. That's awesome. That's the library, and that's the plaque. That's my pastor, Andrew Morrell, descendant of Weaver. He's making a way. He's got an interracial church in the city. He used to be the pastor of Hills Chapel out in Weaver, and then they closed the doors. They said there's just not enough people. He's like, we'll take that 501c3 downtown. And that's what they're doing. They're making a difference. His cousin is the mayor of Marion. And I'm hoping that there might be a sisterhood that happens between some of the folks down here and Marion, Indiana. I can't end without thanking all the people that have made this possible. Our universities that we taught at supported this, and all the people in Grant County. And now, the people here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Priest, for everything. I hope you all enjoyed this first half. We're going to do a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and do kind of like a fireside chat with 3 individuals here. One's an anthropologist, the other 2 are family members of mine from the Indiana area as well as Jamestown. So 5 minutes, and then we'll be right back, and then we'll get started.